Welcome. I hope your summer is going well so far. Been a quiet summer thus far for Aston Villa, but I see that as a good thing. What I'm about to say may not be seen as a good thing by Villa fans, but I suspect that the club is going to have some very serious and difficult decisions to make over Morgan Rogers later this summer. Not necessarily because of PSR, but because of simple economics and the nature of a market. And I'm not a negative headline peddler begging for clicks and likes. In fact, there are a lot of positives in the fact that your club can buy a player for 8 million rising to 16 and potentially selling him on for 9 figures. Presented by 24/7 Services, let's call this a late June market update. Welcome inside the parlor. And one of the reasons why we're talking about Morgan Rogers today is that allegedly there are 3 pretty big clubs that are very keen on securing Morgan Rogers' services this summer. And I'll get into that in more detail later. But when you have 3 clubs on the line and they're circling and they're motivated, well, that has the potential of turning into a bidding war. And the good news for us is that we have made it a habit of buying players at peanuts and then selling them on for a lot more. I mean, John Duran we got for 18 million. We tripled our money there. This could be the case with Morgan Rogers. Even Omari Kellerman and Carney Chukwuemeka fall into that camp. And if you can do it once, you could probably do it again. Not qualifying for Champions League means that in order to replenish or even strengthen the squad, we'll probably have to sell at least one core player, because at the very best, you can make 100 million if you do well in Champions League. Baseline about 30 to 40 for just qualifying. Europa League is a break-even endeavor, so there is a shortfall looming. Incredibly, you can go and win the Conference League like Chelsea did last season and actually lose money doing so. Boubacar Kamara is an interesting one because, first of all, apparently he's the most chilled-out dude you're ever going to meet off the park, and so him not signing a contract extension may not be a surprise just from a personality standpoint. He's also one of Unai Emery's favorites, according to Jacob Ramsey and Morgan Rogers, who were joking that he and Pau Torres can have horrible games and you'd never hear a peep out of the manager. But we don't know if there are suitors, say, for Kamara. You'd think there would be. Then there's the Champions League carrot. And perhaps maybe one day down the road, if we were to sell Kamara, we may be thankful that he didn't sign what is apparently an absolutely unbelievable contract, given Kamara's recent injury history. Forgive me for repeating myself, but Jacob Ramsey and Ollie Watkins are names that come up often. Ramsey because of pure profit and Ollie Watkins because of age and value, and he has suitors right now. As the saying goes, though, where there's smoke, there is fire, and there is a lot of smoke around Morgan Rogers at the minute. Do I want to lose Morgan Rogers? Of course not, because he's become a player who can affect games all by himself, and that's a very difficult quality to find and replace, even though Unai Emery did find it, which means he and his group can probably do it again. I'm convinced in my heart of hearts that Aston Villa is not out actively shopping Morgan Rogers. But just because I don't have a for sale sign out in front of my house right now doesn't mean somebody can't knock on my door and make me an offer. It happens with special houses and for special players. And right now, we apparently have 3 clubs that are seriously interested in Rogers, including Arsenal, Chelsea, and supposedly Bayern Munich. Just using that house analogy, if someone came and knocked on the door and offered you more than what you paid for your house and more than the current market value, emotions aside, you would have to sit down and have a serious conversation with your partner over a sale. I mean, a motivated buyer wants specifically this house and is willing to overpay to get it. The proverbial fish on the line when you're not even out fishing. And if you're in debt, or you need 24/7 services to come and replace your roof because it's time, or you need a new car, or you just want to take more vacations following the mighty Villa around Europe, well then the decision to take that offer becomes that much easier. And here's where not making Champions League football this coming season may have Aston Villa considering what the PSR situation might look like 1 year from now. And it's also why I think there is going to have to be a decision made over Morgan Rogers this summer. Just to divert for one quick moment, but I know right now that you probably have a trades-oriented project for your home or your office or recreational property right now that needs doing. Maybe it is the roof. What is preventing you from picking up the phone and calling this show's sponsor, 24/7 Services, right now? Is it trust? How do I trust these guys that they're going to do a great job that I'm going to be happy with for the money that I'm paying? Or how can I trust these guys to be inside my home when I'm not there? When a company has contracts with huge firms like Network Rail or the co-op chain of grocers, or smaller companies that are repeat customers like Rowan Precision, led by Martin Barker, who's a viewer of this show, well, those are pretty good endorsements. Not to mention that I'm not going to align myself or this show with people I don't trust. When you meet Paul Handsaker or Brad Gregory or Painter Jay, you will realize why these guys are so busy. Because people trust them. I would love to see Morgan Rogers continue to flourish, thrive, and evolve in Villa colors, but there is no guarantee that that's going to happen. I mean, his career trajectory has gone like this in 18 months. Is this just going to continue happening? And it's gone like this largely because of Unai Emery. Will that carry on under somebody else? I mean, there's always a leveling off period for players, especially those under the de-risking age of 23. Now, even a leveled off Morgan Rogers is a pretty darn good player, but my point is, there are no guarantees in football. Here's another major issue that has to be addressed. What is Morgan Rogers' best position? The position that will help us win the most. Now, it's great having tactical intelligence, and Rogers has that in abundance. I mean, I think he could play any one of 5 positions if he was asked to, including central midfield, and he'd figure it out. But do you need, for example, a $100 million player tasked with shutting down the opponent's left fullback and left winger like Rogers did down the stretch with us? I mean, could you not find a cheaper player to do that kind of work? Or could you convince Danielle Mallon, say, to learn how to do that? When Rogers plays as a 10, we see glimpses of the spectacular. However, he gives the ball away an awful lot, and that is an inescapable truth, and you can go back and look at those numbers. Maybe the 10 is his best position, but in January, we brought in Marco Asensio, and Morgan Rogers played on the right-hand side in a very different role, and even though he still contributed to goals, how many times did I say he's just not as noticeable or impactful on that side of the park, even if he fulfilled the mandate that his manager gave him? From a simple asset management perspective, is that the best use of a $100 million player? But maybe the biggest issue of all, and a fact of life in football when you have a hugely valuable asset in your squad, is the injury risk. And here's where you could even see Nassif Sawiris getting involved like he did with Jack Grealish, because from an asset perspective, very similar here, just with a younger and much better behaved player. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but Morgan Rogers is playing a lot of football, including regularly for England now. If he were to get injured, well, that hurts us in the near term, but of course it will hurt his valuation as well. And if the injury is serious enough, I mean, the valuation not just drops, but sometimes it stays dropped for a long period of time. Let's say Villa doesn't sell Morgan Rogers this summer and thinks to itself, well, we could always sell him this time next year. What if he has an injury in that time? What if his form drops? What if there aren't 3 teams circling for his services this time next year? What if his value drops? Now, it could also increase, of course. But using Emi Martinez as an example, a year ago, if we had put him on the market, we could have easily fetched between 50 and 75 million for him, and people would have freaked out. But if Unai Emery had a time machine Knowing what he knows today, do you not think he'd hop in that time machine with Monchi, go back a year, and put Martinez on the market? Of course he would. And this is where the expression, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. If your granny was to bequeath you an heirloom vase that had a high appraisal value, well, you wouldn't walk around the house with it from room to room or up and down the stairs. No, you'd put it in a safe place to protect it. And unfortunately in football, there is no safe place on the pitch. And although Morgan Rogers logged a lot of minutes for us without injury last year, like 3-game weeks, 90-minute efforts at times, when does that start to catch up with him? Because Unai Emery rode him hard. And when you have a high appraisal on a player or there's a big offer on the table, these are the things you have to consider. I think about Daniel Malen and what his role is going to be with us going forward, because he scored a lot of goals in a relatively small sample size. Like, is he Bailey's upgrade replacement? And what is it going to take for him to start? Because it seemed like Morgan Rogers was going to start one way or another last season, whether that was on the left, central, or right. And how do we know that a team of more specialized, well-defined players might not be better for an Unai Emery system than the hybrids who get plugged in wherever they're needed? We don't know. Nobody will know until we see it. The other weird thought that I just can't seem to shake is the plight of some of those players who have left the Unai Emery regime recently. I'm thinking specifically of Douglas Luiz, Moussa Diaby, and John Duran, players who some thought were untouchable. Now, none of those guys had the attitude and personality of Morgan Rogers, and that was part of the problem. But Douglas Luiz, if you believe the Italian media, Juve want to sell him on now at a loss. Moussa Diaby, 24 games in the Saudi Pro League, 5 goals, 14 assists. I mean, it's all relative. And John Duran had his inevitable bust up and is now ready to leave his club after just 13 games. A lot of Villa fans were quite upset when we sold Carney Chukwuemeka and Omari Kellerman for a net of 50 million or so in pure profit. And what happened to those players? Well, unfortunately, injuries. Now, they're young enough that they could still go on to have great careers, but at the time, Villa said there was an opportunity in the market that we may never get again. And I'm trying to think of players who have left this current regime at Aston Villa and gone on to have better careers since, and I can't think of one. It's highly possible that Morgan Rogers will be a generational player. One thing I know for sure, he is an absolutely smashing lad. Somebody told me he's the kind of kid you want your daughter to marry. Well-raised, humble, kind, eager to learn. Problem is, all the other clubs know that behavior as well, which is one of the reasons why they would be willing to stump up 100 million for him, knowing that personality is not a risk. Integration may be, continued trajectory may be, but not personality. We also may have to accept that these 3 clubs can offer Morgan Rogers something that we can't this season, namely Champions League football, but in Chelsea's case, a chance for him to play with close friend in Cole Palmer. And you know what? They may also be able to say to Morgan Rogers, we've identified this as being your best position on the team, a clear and consistent role that you'll play for us, rather than locking down the right-hand side in a defensively conservative type role. As I told you before, I don't fall in love with players. All I care about is that the club continues to evolve and progress in this kind of direction, and for the most part, we have. And I'm not trying to sell Morgan Rogers. If September 13th comes around and he's playing for us at Everton's new stadium, I'll be thrilled. If he's not, I won't be surprised, and I hope that I've given you some perspective as to why we shouldn't be surprised or even disappointed, because Morgan Rogers is the kind of player that should go on and do well after leaving Villa, even though it is kind of weird. When you even go back to Jack Grealish, what's happened to some of these players that have left this club? And again, this is not all about PSR. This is about simple economics and opportunities in the market. I think things are going to start heating up in the hours and days ahead. I will try to stay on top of that for you. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. And as always, up the mighty Villa!